Good evening, everybody. I am not Donal McNally. You might notice a minor difference in height between the two of us. My name is Andy Long. I am the Pro-Vice Chancellor for the Faculty of Engineering. It's my pleasure to introduce this lecture today. It's one of the most enjoyable things I get to do in my job is to introduce people who've got very exciting things to say. So I'm not going to speak for very long because you're going to be entertained by Donal. Many of you will know Donal, many of you will know a lot about him. I'm just going to tell you a bit about his background. So Donal studied for a BSc and then a PhD in physics at the University of Exeter. He was then employed as a research assistant and then a lecturer in the Department of Anatomy at the University of Bristol between 1989 and 2001. Donal was then appointed as a senior lecturer here at Nottingham in the Department of Mechanical Materials and Manufacturing Engineering as part of an initiative to grow teaching and research activity generally at the engineering and medicine interface, and particularly in bioengineering. Donal was then promoted to a readership and then in 2016 to a personal chair in bioengineering. He's done lots of things for the department, the faculty and the university over the years. He has, for example, been the course director for mechanical engineering, which is the biggest program in the engineering faculty. He's been on the faculty ethics committee. He's been a board member of the Medical Technologies Research Priority Area for the university and head of the Bioengineering Research Group. He's also a frequent visitor to the local butchers in Keyworth, where we both live, where he retrieves some of the parts that you don't necessarily want to buy, but form very useful parts of his experimental program. We may see some of them. I've never seen this many props for a lecture like this before, so I expect that we're going to be thoroughly entertained and possibly slightly showered with some bodily fluids. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Donal.
What a lot of people. Right, good evening. Happy Biomechanics Day. It took me, well, as you heard, it's taken me quite a while to actually get round to doing my inaugural lecture, so I thought National Biomechanics Day was the day to do it on. There are lots of things you've got to get right with an inaugural lecture. So I'm told they've got to be educational. They've got to be biographical. I don't know why you want to find out about me, but you will. You will also find out why you will never, ever see my knees. Now, as well as that, I've got to give you a vision of the future. So we have the past and the future. Has to be suitable for a non-specialist audience, but it has to demonstrate cutting-edge science. And you'll lynch me if it isn't entertaining. So that's quite a worrying set of things to do. And I was feeling quite bad about this when a colleague came along and said, that's all very well, but have you decided what your style's going to be for your lecture? So that terrified me. And then I thought for a little bit, and I thought about the student feedback I got, and it came together. So, blame him. This is what they said about me. So, really happy about that. So, let's start at the beginning in a former workhouse on a cold November night. That's good. Little baby Donal was born. I was so disturbing to look at. My own grandfather had to stop painting me because it upset him too much. Now, obviously, I was destined for the work I was doing and started my spinal loading experiments at really quite an early age. You can see my sister there directing affairs. Now, this picture, apart from the disturbing hairstyle, misses quite a lot. Now, you have to realise that this was just the end of the 60s, so my beautiful shirt and tie combination made by my grandmother was bright pink. The other thing that you don't quite see is this is a record of my first foray into self-experimenting with impact biomechanics, particularly cycle injuries. I hadn't learnt to ride a bike at this stage, yet managed to steer my bike down a very steep hill, miss all the trees at the bottom until I got to the bottom, and then got a gorgeous black eye, which came up over the course of the party that was there for. So, went to a very deeply strange primary school, which wasn't much for science, but my headmistress set fire to the church during nativity play. Gives you some idea of what it was like. So, if you want to sort of see where my science came from, it's probably my parents. Oh dear. So, Dad used to direct the University of London Observatory, and the size of his equipment is unparalleled. That's all I'm saying. Mum was an organic chemist, and these were the first 2 papers she ever wrote. Between them, they've had over 300 citations, and 55 years on, they're still getting cited. Dear, this has never happened to me before in a lecture. I do apologise. 2 deep breaths. Right. So, secondary school. When I went there, it was a local authority comprehensive. It had been the Hertford Grammar School, and it celebrated its 400th anniversary last year. Now, I'm a minor player in what Richard Hale has given us. It's given us Ron Weasley, Foggy Dewhurst, and possibly most impressively, Biggles. Now, apart from the creative arts, they had really good science department and a fantastic physics department. And that set me up pretty much for the rest of my career. So I ended up in Exeter, which had quite an inflated opinion of itself, or drank a lot of lager. Physics department, as many physics departments are, was a tower on the hill. And essentially I had a thoroughly good time there, learnt to wear chunky jumpers with pride, developed another disturbing hairstyle, and I generally enjoyed being on Dartmoor. And when it came to doing a PhD, I really wanted to stay there. Now, as I started doing my PhD, Exeter hit the news in terms of hospital physics, and not really in a good way. The person who taught me my radiotherapy planning got questions answered about him in Parliament. He gave his patients 25% extra free due to a rather minor calculation error, which has become so famous there are textbooks that it features in. So I thought radiation physics probably isn't for me. And for some reason, which still isn't clear to me, incontinence beckoned. Exeter is very famous for its hip implant, but 2 medical devices you don't hear so much about are its recording nappy and its pelvic floor stimulator, which tragically ran at the same frequency as the Exmouth lifeboat call-out. I had an absolutely fantastic time here, and it's a privilege doing a job. Is that it again? I have no emotions. This is wrong. Doing a job where you see people recover and get better. You know, people came into the incontinence clinic completely disabled and went out cured. And that set me up, really, for the rest of my career. That's really what I decided I wanted to do. However, I felt it was important that I should leave Exeter with one more medical device with which they could be proud of. Oh, sorry, it had moved on from being the Sphincter Research Unit when I was there, and I left them with that. I was particularly proud of the adjustable depth stop. So, throughout my undergraduate course and my PhD, I suffered from appalling back pain. And an advert came out from a research group in Bristol that was working on back pain, and I thought, oh, I've got to apply for that. And I did, and it's, again, changed my life. Started off working at the preclinical vet school, which, when I first went there, was situated in an old cinema building on Park Row. Hideously unsuitable building. And eventually we moved to an old school, which had a rather more modern, suitable bit on the outside. And it was a really exciting and dynamic place to work in, and it's really where I discovered quite how fantastic spines are. Spines are brilliant. So, don't know, most of you have seen me lugging this around the university at some stage or other. This is where I keep my plastic skeleton in, and I bring it in on various occasions. However, just for this one night, and this one night only, I have upgraded for you. This is Delia. So the textbook says that you can bend your neck forward about 50 degrees. Go on then. And back about 60. And you can bend sideways about 45 degrees. And there's a similar range for the lumbar spine, but I think we'll let Delia do it properly. Goodbye, and thank you very much. How can I follow that? So, spines are something else, aren't they? You don't think about them being there. You don't think about the movements you can get out of them until you see someone do something quite extraordinary with theirs. So, back in November, we had Delia in before, and we put her in the open MRI scanner that they have just got across the road in the medical school. So, huge thank you to Dorothea, our Rob Deneen, and Andy Cooper for helping set this up. So we took Delia and we imaged her spine. Now, let me get to where I can point to things. So, on your left, you've got my spine. And strangely, my spine, if you forget about the rather squished L4 and the 6th lumbar vertebra, which probably shouldn't be there, my spine's actually quite normal for a man of my age and sedentary lifestyle. This is Delia's. So I've got quite healthy intervertebral discs, even around where my fracture was. And you can see they're sort of quite wide spaced, they're quite chunky, they're quite nice. If you look at Delia's, she has these huge pumped up discs. This is one of the reasons why her spine is really quite so flexible. In the open MR, we got her taking up positions that are sort of extremes of flexion and extension. It's quite hard for her to hold these positions for the sort of 90 seconds it takes to acquire an image. So unfortunately, the images are a little bit blurry, but you can see how the bones and how the discs in her spine are moving there. Really quite remarkable. And most of that movement is down to hard work and training, which is essentially, I think a lot of work in extension has levered those disc spaces opened and made them so big and so hydrated and filled with water. So, yeah, Mr. Green. Mr. Green has supported my research like almost no one else. He is a lovely man. Let's get this out. I have some of his wares here. Right, now. Oh, let's put some gloves on. It always helps, doesn't it? Remember, I'll be shaking your hands afterwards. Okay, so this is a lamb chop view of Delia. Okay, lamb chop, see the similarity? Right, and the discs are these white bits. Are you okay here? Can you see that? Because I can't see it. Right, so it's these bits here. Got a bit of cowtail here, shows it nicely. And the discs are these shiny white things. And disc material is an amazing thing. It's all puffy and squishy and juicy and squidges around, and that's why you've got the flexibility. It's got a sort of jelly middle and a fibrous outside. But if... Okay? Yep. But if you start trying to pull it, it's very tough and really doesn't move around very much. Now, what I'm hoping is the thing, ooh, horrid. But this also shows the discs. Can you see it's sort of bulged out here? Discs have this amazing ability to swell. So they're a bit like self-inflating tires. They really have this sort of lovely pressurized roll that sort of helps support your weight but allow movement. It's a really clever solution to the problem of how you actually go about supporting the spine, bearing the big compressive loads that it does, but also allowing the movement that you see. So when I first started at Bristol, I brought with me a sort of trick I'd learnt from the incontinence field, which was a way of measuring the distribution of load through squishy materials. There's nothing fancy about it. It's a needle with a transducer on the end, and all you do is you pull it through your squishy material, and it gives you a record of loading with place. It's because the pressures are so high inside discs, it was quite difficult to make a really high pressure transducer that was that small. That led on to mapping out the load distribution inside discs, so we got a pattern of how the load was moving around. And then once you've got that, you've got a technique you can use. You can look at all sorts of things. So we looked at what made discs slip. We looked at what happened when you fractured the bones close to the discs. We looked at what happened when discs aged or became degenerate. We even started looking at some of the surgical techniques. Now, my sort of first linkage with Nottingham is starting to come up here. A spine surgeon called Robert Mulholland took an interest in this work and amazed me by agreeing to stick my needle in some of his patients. So we looked at how loads varied inside the discs of people with disc disease. Another surgeon in Oxford allowed me to stick the transducer in some of his child patients who are having corrective surgery for scoliosis to try and understand what was going on inside those discs that caused the discs to be deformed. So, yeah, it looks a little bit gory. Nothing compared to to tea tonight, children. So that's the load inside discs. The next thing I was interested in was what was happening with those fibers on the outside of the discs. And the way I like to think of them is it's like a bag of satsumas. Okay, you've got fibers, they're very stiff, you can't stretch the fibers at all, but that's not how the material deforms. So your bag will stretch and deform in all sorts of ways as you pull it, not because the fibers are stretching or even particularly that they're bending, but because they're changing their orientation and changing their shape. And that's exactly what's going on in the annulus of a disc. So that's what we then went on to do some modelling of to try and give us an idea of how these fibers would orientate themselves, how they would transmit load. Next thing. My eyesight's getting very bad. Right. That's all very well from a theoretical point of view. Something else we looked at was trying to image those fibers directly, and that's quite a difficult thing to do. Discs are opaque, they're not transparent, you can't see into them. The fibers have got the same sort of radiopacity as any other part of the disc. You can't look at them with X-rays. You can't really look at it too well with MRI, although we tried a few clever tricks with it. Ultrasound proved the best, and we got these beautiful high-resolution pictures. Can you see there the alternating layers of fibers and how they crisscross over? So this was a technique for being able to see how those fibers change their orientation and rearrange themselves inside the annulus of the disc to allow movement to take place. Okay. The final thing of disc mechanics that I'm going to bore you with is the way fluid moves around inside them. I said I was going to humiliate my son, who's a mathematician, at the start of the lecture by telling him that squishy was a sad technical term for a poro-hyperelastic medium that was completely saturated. So here is a porous hyperelastic medium that's completely saturated. It's a bath sponge in a coffee percolator, and obviously this is the sort of thing that people like me do. And this is what I want you to think about discs being? They're this sort of squishy thing that's got a lot of water in. And as you stand up during the day, you load up your spine and you squeeze water out, and you get a little bit shorter. So when you go home tonight, you're going to be about 1-2 centimetres shorter than you were when you got out of bed in the morning. Okay for me, not so good for some of you lot. During the night, the water comes back in again, and everything fills back up again. And that's brilliant, that's how it should be. Some of the really clever little bits of mechanics are that you're standing up twice as long as you're lying down, and actually it's a lot harder for your discs to get shorter than it is to get taller. So there's some really clever bits about it. But the thing I want to tell you about here is to do with how discs feed. So you've got cells inside discs, but you don't have any blood vessels. There's nothing inside your discs that will get food to the cells that need it. And it's quite hard to do, so, right. I'm a professional academic. I have a marking red fountain pen. Right, so, ooh, Donal's bleeding. Right. So, we've got food in the fluid there, but it's not getting into the sponge. Okay, the disc is getting no nutrition. During the day, the water gets squeezed out, and you don't get any nutrition at all. During the night, suddenly it soaks in, and your discs go a beautiful pink colour because it's soaked in that dye, and it's soaked in, so you've got that food that's going into the discs. And then during the day, actually what you're doing is you're squeezing the waste products out again. So you have this lovely tidal flow. We looked at various computational ways of modelling this, and we also had a look at looking at this in real life. This is a real volunteer. In an MRI machine, we've given them a dye that shows up bright. Yeah, I know. I feel the same. And can you see how the dye is starting to move in, almost like a tide mark? And we were able to quantify the motion of nutrients through the disc in that way. So that was quite exciting. Right. Now, spines are wonderful, and disc research is wonderful, exciting, and something that's been very good to me. But there are times when it can be frustrating. And I'm fortunately able to use Delia as an example, and she's very kindly given me permission to tell you a little bit more about her. Some of you may have spotted it. I know there are some radiologists in the audience. I have a colleague who, I won't do the Swiss-German accent. His motto is, you must treat the patient and not the X-ray. And if you look at Delia, she has something quite badly wrong with her lumbar spine at L23. Can you see, let me come back here. Can you see, there is a big slip there. That disc is completely damaged, and you can see how things are really moving around the way they shouldn't be. Is that obvious? Yep. Okay. If you look at the area of that slip, you can see these strange patterns appearing in the vertebral body. They're evidence that there's an inflammatory process going on. These changes are often linked with pain. Okay, so it's starting to look like Delia shouldn't be able to move very much. The reason she's got this slip actually is she has 2 small fractures in her spine that essentially allow the top half and the bottom half to slide around quite independently of each other. If you look above that slip, this is the sort of pork chop slice again. That white bit is the sac that contains her spinal nerves. And the nerves themselves are these little black dots that you can see there. So you've got little black dots of nerves floating around in a big, wide, open sac. That's a good thing. So you get down to the slip there. You can see that has got much, much smaller and all the little nerves are squeezed in tightly together, and that's not good. It's not absolutely bad. If they were squeezed a little bit more than that, she wouldn't be walking, let alone doing her act. Now the final thing I want you to look at are these muscles, and can you see they're sort of a nice uniform grey colour, which is how a cheap supermarket pork chop would look. If you look at, sorry Delia if you're here, if you look at the muscles a little bit below the slip, can you see this sort of marbling? That's fat. This is Kobe beef, this is. So really good if you want to eat it, not good if you want to walk around. So, I thought Delia was a miracle just seeing her act, but seeing her do her act with a spine that looks like that, it's amazing. And that's brilliant, but it does make me wonder what I've been doing with most of my research life, trying to understand things that clearly don't help a lot. Right. So, I think it's time to talk about something else. Some of you will know I was a patient a while back. I had a disagreement with a red Toyota cycling home, and the red Toyota won. And I ended up with a neck that was broken in 3 places, various fractures elsewhere. You saw the squashed lumbar spine. Now, I had a lot of high-energy fractures in my neck that were down to compression, and I was unconscious on the roadside. I got quite a serious head injury as well. And if you look at the helmet I was wearing, okay, oh, it's falling off, completely egg-shelled, okay? This helmet took a lot of the energy out of that impact in braking, and it saved my life. I was brave enough to say that on the internet, and within a few hours, in fact, at 1:30 in the morning, someone, and to protect his dignity, we shall call him Nutter A, sent me an email, and it started off nice enough, didn't it? Very glad that you seem to have made a good recovery. Bless him. I note that you feel that your helmet, which broke, saved your life. A little bit patronising, don't you think? Given what I do. He doesn't really seem to understand energy to failure and quite how bicycle helmets work. And then he said that. I'm not going to tell you what I would think about that, because this is a open lecture. I told him it amused me. And this got me quite upset, and got me thinking quite a lot about head injuries. Right, so I think I need a volunteer. Sorry? You're coming down. Brilliant. Yay. This is Ziad. I was hoping for someone younger and possibly prettier. So Ziad, would you come and stand here? And would you demonstrate what happens to a brain when it impacts?
Do you mean hit it or drop it in?
I think drop it in the paddling pool. Oh, that's disappointing. Oh, it only cleaved in 2. That's good jelly. No, I've got something else for the brain. Do you want to, should we pick one up and go from a, oh, yeah. Okay, that is brain mechanics for you. Okay, that's what brain is like. Ew. Right, where did I put my dibber? In the bicycle helmet, obviously. So that's what a brain injury looks like. So, actually, whilst you're here and you're feeling so brave, what's Newton's second law of motion?
Crap. By the way, I'm a mechanical engineer, so I should know this, shouldn't I?
So there's a hint there. That's how Newton wrote it.
Well, isn't it like the sum of the forces, sum of vector forces equals the mass times the
Acceleration.
acceleration? Yeah.
Yes. Right, there you go. Hey! Well done, Ziad. You go home before I upset you. So, yeah, force is mass times acceleration. So the force, that's the stuff that breaks things, and that's proportional to the acceleration. So that's how quickly you speed up or how quickly you stop. And in terms of crash mechanics, the other important thing you know, this is sort of GCSE, SUVAT equations for constant accelerations. The acceleration depends on the space you've got to stop. So it's braking distances. The longer you've got, the smaller the acceleration. The smaller the acceleration, the smaller the force. And helmets, protective headgear, airbags, crash mats, all work because essentially they give your head space. They give that space for it to slow down. There's nothing magical about it. There's nothing complicated. It's just about setting up space. So this is, I think, what happened to me. So hit the windscreen, and then I went sailing over the top. So it wasn't being hit by the car that actually really caused me any problems at all. I think that's where I got the lumbar injury. What caused me the problem was landing on my head on the road afterwards. We zoom in on that. That's the moment. There are two acceleration traces there. One's green, that's a simulation with me wearing a helmet. One's red, that's without a helmet. You can see the red spike is much higher than the green spike. You can translate those accelerations into probabilities of injuries. And with a helmet, AIS2 just means quite a nasty head injury. That's sort of period of unconsciousness. So I had about a 60% chance of that. And that's what I had. So I'm feeling quite confident about that. If I wasn't wearing that helmet, I would have been dead. Okay? Not a ray, you're talking out of your bottom. So that's my type of cycle crash. Just to wind Nutter Ray up, because he runs a website, I also looked at children wearing cycle helmets. Children wearing cycle helmets, or children being hit by cars, is a little bit different. They tend not to get thrown over the top of the car because they're lower down. They tend to hit the car and get thrown forward. So we did some simulations. And if the car hit the child at 20 miles an hour, they had about a 50% chance of dying if they weren't wearing a helmet. They didn't die if they were wearing one. Okay, 30 miles an hour, not so good. 80-90% chance of dying without a helmet, 50% with. Okay, 40 miles an hour, you really don't want to hit a child doing 40 miles an hour. But a helmet does give you a little bit of hope. So, when you cycle home tonight, please wear a bicycle helmet. Right. Shaken babies and other cheery things. It's gone. It's a wise mother, isn't it? Now, shaken babies they cause a lot of controversy. They're sort of religiously held beliefs that you can damage a baby by shaking it or you can't. And it's all been played out in the newspapers and the courts, and it's all horrible. And when I was a good person, I've grown out of that now, but I thought might be able to contribute a little bit to that. The crash test dummies of babies aren't brilliant. Anyone want to tell me why those two crash dummies wouldn't be good for looking at shaken babies? How many parents are there? Look, they're newborn babies and they're sitting bolt upright with their head looking at you. Babies are floppy, wobbly things. It's really hard to study the mechanics of their head and therefore the mechanics of if the mechanics of the neck isn't right. So we did a bit of computer simulation because that seemed the easiest way of doing a lot of experiments varying neck properties. And these are our experiments. So yellow means baby gets concussed. Red means baby dies, basically, and all our things were down here. And it looks like that's down to the sort of proof you can't shake a baby to kill it. And I'm not sure I actually believe that. I think what's wrong is this graph. This graph is all about a single insult. This is about someone going ka-chunk to a baby and saying that's like shaking it for a period of time. So I think what happens when that goes on is a bit more like this. Another jelly brain. Now, I've grown feeble in my old age, and I work in an engineering department, so I've got assistance. So there we've got a baby shaking away in not a particularly interesting way. Let's just change the frequency a bit. I like that one. We've got particularly strong brains today. Let's try. Another one. Okay, so what you're seeing there is resonance. Every time you shake the baby, it puts a little bit more energy in. And the brain moves a bit more, and it keeps on moving. Oh, for goodness sake, explode. It's incredible, isn't it? Right. So I would be lying to you if I said that's go for it. If that's really what happens with a brain. We'll leave that going just to see what happens. That one. Okay, I've got 2 eggs here.
Oh, okay.
I've missed out a demonstration. I need to... So, that one really doesn't want to spin. That one does. Anyone want to know? Anyone want an idea of what the difference between them is? Yeah, you're right. You're spot on. That's the boiled egg. So that hasn't got a liquid core that's spinning round or sort of spinning up or spinning down. Now, let's see if I can do this. Yes. Sometimes you can just stop it and get it to spin again. Right. The other thing I wanted to do. Now, right, Fran, you're up. Come on, hop it. And since you're standing up, Chloe, you can come up too. Right. Now, Fran gets to do this because these are her tights. So, Chloe, shake that egg. You hate it. It's not your friend. Right, Fran, with your tights, do that. And then spin it. I'm going to have to give up on this. Right, is that the best you can do? Right, let's see how badly you've abused the egg. Can you see? Yolk's intact. Chloe, you're useless. Thank you ever so much. You will be a wonderful mother. Fran, let's see what you've done. Fran, don't have children. Okay, so what you saw there is that eggs, and in fact brains as well, are very susceptible to rotational shear, scrambled egg, and not just linear accelerations. Right, where do I go with the next slide? Oh yes. This is, as you have probably gathered, Humiliate My Family Day. I married a clone. My wife is an identical twin, and her identical twin sister is also an identical twin. My sister is unrelated to them. And of course, they are very cute and also very beautiful there. They weren't always quite that way. They were born very prematurely, and they were born very small. Now, Diana, you officially qualify as very low birth weight, apparently. Nicola, you're extremely low birth weight. And I found this graph of what their survival chances will be in different years. I have blurred out some of the images because I occasionally pretend to be a gentleman. Actually, they are both very old, and they are right at the bottom of this graph here. When Nicola was born, she had a 7% chance of living. I've gone peculiar again. Diana did a little bit better. Now, the good news is the shape of that graph. And even for extremely low birth weight babies, the chances of survival now are very, very much improved. And there's a lot that's gone into that. And we have quite an important neonatologist in the audience, so I will choose my words with extreme care. A lot of it has to do with the expertise and fantastic scientific understanding of such people. It also has a lot to do with the development of technologies, particularly around ventilation and life support systems. One other thing that really makes a difference is getting the babies to somewhere special that knows how to look after them, to a specialist intensive care unit, rather than Poole General Hospital. You did remarkably well, to be honest. This sort of led to got me involved in a project. A neonatologist called Don Sharkey was working on this, and he knew I did disturbing things with babies, and thought, this is someone I want to be friends with. And he introduced me into a project he was doing that was looking at how these babies get transported into hospital. So they're loaded up into a special trolley. This is mine, and it's missing all the expensive bits, unfortunately. Okay, this is what Nicola looked like. Not pretty, very wobbly head. So they're put in incubators, and they're driven around in ambulances. And that seems like quite a nice, safe thing to do. So there are sort of 16,000 of these transfers in the UK every year, and about 1,300 of those are what they call high-risk babies. These are babies like Nicola. And these are very sick babies. They're quite likely to get brain bleeds. If they're transported for some reason or other, they have more than double the chance of getting a brain bleed. They're far more likely to survive, but they're likely to end up with bleeding to the ventricles. I'm not sure if you can see, there's a blood clot in. That space is normal, that should be there. You can see in the space, there's a thing. You're okay, you don't have one. Right, so this is what it's like when I drive an ambulance. Was that the university? Earth calling Lorelei. Was that the university? Yeah. So that's Science Road. Okay. Now that's a little bit unfair because normally these babies would be in a sort of little restraint to keep them still, to keep the tubes in place. But there are issues with those restraints. So this is a crash test we did. Watch the baby's neck. Yeah. So, if you like, this is the short-term future part. What we're looking at is why you might get those brain bleeds. We think it's to do with the noise and the vibration. When we measured the vibration, it's sort of up here in the ploughing a field sort of level. It's not a good place to be. If you were a professional driver being exposed to those levels of vibration, you'd be just about on your health and safety exposure limit. If you look at the noise, again, intensive care units are nice, quiet places where babies are not stressed, their blood flow's normal. When they're exposed to loud, sudden noises, they do get stressed. Things happen to their blood pressure. And you can see inside an ambulance, things are really quite noisy as well. So what we're doing at the moment, and this is the reason I now own an emergency ambulance. I've always wanted an emergency vehicle. Yeah, that's final thing ticked off. Marry, clone, get ambulance. We're trying to modify these things to make them a lot more comfortable and less stressful for the baby by taking away some of the vibration and noise. It's not easy to do because there are all sorts of clinical constraints in terms of how the clinicians can see the baby, what access they have. You can't put a cozy over the top of it, for instance. How the trolley passes into the ambulance is governed because it has to be the same as any other ambulance for any other trolley. So there's a whole load of stuff that we've just started the project to look at. So let's finish off with something that, is going to trigger me being emotional again. So, moving on. Right. This is a figure that shocked me. So, these are the number of people that die or are seriously injured through road traffic accidents, except for the number on the bottom. These are people who die or are seriously injured because they fall over in hospital. Okay? And this is acute hospitals. This isn't nursing homes. This isn't psychiatric dementia units. This is just acute hospitals. So you can imagine quite the scale of this problem. And I just find that number quite shocking. Nottingham is the safest, one of the safest places to be. It's in the top 15% of hospital trusts for full safety. And it's getting better, and it's getting better. These are numbers for quite a long time ago, 5-year period. The numbers are actually better now. But across the road in Queens and in the City Hospital, Over 5 years, they had 143 fractures, 73 head injuries, and 54 deaths because patients fell over. And it can be falling out of bed. It's quite commonly them falling off the toilet. And if you think about what hospitals are like, they are hard places. Okay? They have got concrete floors with vinyl on them. They have got tiled walls. They've got metal grab rails. They are not places you want to bang your head. If you think back to helmets and packing space, there is no packing space anywhere in a hospital. Quite some time ago, we did a bit of work with one of the care of the elderly consultants. And we looked at people falling out of bed and cracking the back of their head. So 0.6 metres, that's standard hospital bed height. 0.8 metres is the height that you'd go over if you had the cot sides up, and just over a metre is the highest it goes. There are some very expensive beds that drop patients right down close to the floor so that when they fall out of bed they don't hurt themselves. You know what? They work. Very low probabilities of injury. But if we just go back to standard hospital bed height, that's a concrete floor. So, 40-45% chance of quite a serious head injury. If there's just a tiny bit of padding there. So the red bars, they're the sorts, the sort of rubber crumb tiles that you get in playgrounds where children are on climbing frames. Because even people that design playgrounds have worked out that if you fall on a soft surface, you don't get head injuries. Can you see how much that's dropped the chance? The green ones, that's like a camping carry mat. So about a centimetre of foam. Again, drops that chance of head injury. If you put an inch thick pad down, almost takes it away, even at heights. So why do they do this? I don't know. So if you think about it, you've got a concrete subfloor, you've got a thin vinyl thing. No, we're not going to do the eggs. I've done the eggs, they don't work. You end up with something that is really hard, really unforgiving. There are safety flooring available that have clever rubber springs built into the back, which give you something that's a much softer and more compliant thing to land on. So there are, I'm almost on time for the booze, 2 quick things for me to say. First of all, thank you everyone. Thank you everyone for coming here. Thank you to the people who have helped me put on this lecture. So we've got Mark, Tom and Lorelei. Mohammed has done a beautiful job holding doors open. Diane has been fantastic with the invitations. The biggest thank you, though, has to go out to the people I've worked with. Eddie's gone soppy. I have not been soppy in my entire life. Ridiculous. I started compiling a list of everyone I'd written a paper with, everyone I'd supervised, everyone I'd had a grant with, and so on. And it came to literally hundreds of people. I couldn't put them all up on a slide, so you know who you are. Thank you, all of you. Oh, come on. You don't get away that way, starting the clapping early, Nicola. Nicola is a fantastic lecturer and researcher in her own right. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you very much, Donal. That was informative and entertaining in equal measure. I said to Donal at the start of this, I reminded him that it is the tradition that we don't have questions from the audience at the end of these lectures. I'm sure you'll be able to ask Donal some questions later. But I did also say to him that I was going to attempt to summarise his lecture, and he said good luck with that, and now I really understand why. I guess we've learned a lot about the mechanics of the human body from just below the waist upwards. And I think if I were to try and talk about any of it, without understanding and talking about the science, I'd probably get arrested. So I'm not going to do that. I will note that I've never seen anybody bring a whole person in a bag as a prop for a lecturer. And Delia is clearly the epitome of somebody who understands flexible working. So, look, that's my best joke, so that's all you're going to get. And I'm not going to attempt to summarize anything else. All I will say now is I understand that there are refreshments outside, and these may or may not include the meat, eggs, and jelly that you saw earlier in the lecture. So thank you, everybody. Please enjoy, and thank you again, Donal.